Let's get you a shocking video from Afghanistan. Taliban militants say they've executed 2 women who worked as prostitutes on a US base. As you see in this video, the burqa-clad women got into a car after which Taliban militants opened fire. Well, these pictures of the execution taken by an Associated Press television news crew who was in the vicinity when the women were killed. The crew heard gunshots and filmed from some distance in the dark. The incident happened in the Ghazni province in central Afghanistan.
The Taliban has wreaked havoc on the people of Afghanistan and has made the living conditions nearly impossible. In September of 1996, the Taliban seized Kabul. They imposed their version of the Islamic law on citizens, hoping to ethnically cleanse the vast region of Afghanistan. However, this controversial group has brought extreme harm to the very nation they were trying to protect. Today, 22.1 million people are living in poverty and substandard conditions. Young women are not allowed to be educated, abduction and rape is a daily occurrence, and people live with desperation every single day. The Taliban use a super-traditional interpretation of Islamic law that includes inflicting severe punishment on anyone who dares to disobey these imposed laws. The major ethnic group in Afghanistan, the Pashtun, started the Taliban. They were educated in Pakistan under a radical militant group, the Islamic group whose goal was to unify and reform Muslims.
The Taliban took control of southern and western Afghanistan in 1995. A 34-year-old Afghani woman, Farnaz Nazir, living in Kabul, said, "Because of the Taliban, Afghanistan has become a jail for women. We haven't got any human rights. We haven't the right to go outside, to go to work, to look after our children." Punishments of breaking the Taliban's laws are harsh, to say the least. For example, if you steal something, you will be subjected to a public amputation of your hand. Committing adultery or having a beard that is not of proper length will lead to a public execution, most times with stoning. If organizations such as the United Nations intervene, there will be less infliction on human rights for minuscule offenses committed by the citizens of Afghanistan.
Upstairs from the operating theatre, the children's ward is also at full stretch. They don't have bullet.
One of the major reasons the United Nations was created was the pursuit of human rights. The General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, requiring all nations to promote universal respect for and observance of human rights, and to take joint and separate action. Everyone is entitled to the rights set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Considering these statements, one would think that the United Nations Commission on Human Rights would act quickly upon this matter. Former Secretary General Kofi Annan said, "As we summon the will and the resources needed to succeed in the struggle against terrorism, we must also care for all the victims of terrorism, whether they are the direct targets or the other populations who will be affected by our common effort. That is why I have launched an alert to donors about the potential need for much more generous humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan." So why is this terrible situation still going on? The United Nations has had many resolutions in Afghanistan. However, none of them gave the Afghanis any sort of promise for return to human rights. The United Nations must not only send the International Red Cross and Red Crescent to Afghanistan, but also send troops there and create a new resolution to solve the destruction caused by the Taliban.
A way that the United Nations intervened in Afghanistan was through the United Nations Assistance in Afghanistan. It was created in March 2002 as an integrated mission, directed and supported by the UN Department of Peacekeeping Operations. Although the governmental situation in Afghanistan is beginning to improve, there is a lot that can still be done with the help of the international community. For peace to be achievable, it is arguable that there are 2 main components: reconstruction and security. To reconstruct the Afghan society, more money is needed. Countries should send money in order to support the United Nations and their peacekeeping mission in the early 2000s. By the United Nations as a whole, instead of just the United States paying the entirety of the contributions, donating money to keep the peacekeeping mission functioning, it can also help reconstruct the country and provide security.
On February 15, 1996, the Security Council finally expressed their deep concern for this matter in Afghanistan. There were intensified hostilities around the capital city of Kabul, which halted the flow of humanitarian aid to the city. The Security Council adopted Resolution 1076, which called on all Afghan parties to end hostilities and engage in a political dialogue aimed at achieving national reconciliation. However, this resolution failed, like many of the other resolutions implemented in Afghanistan. The only thing that this resolution accomplished was expressing the United Nations' concerns about the terrorist attacks. It did not stop any of the fighting. As the years went on, poverty worsened, and the United Nations issued a report called The Deepening Crisis, which talked about the absolute destruction of Afghanistan. Money was donated, however no amount of money given by the United Nations ever improved the Afghanis' human rights.
The Taliban are still traveling through Afghanistan, violent as ever, so the United Nations needs to cooperate with the Afghanistan government. Instead of acting similarly to the United States and following their ideals, trying to see the side of the Afghanis government is important. Making an agreement with the Taliban is the only way that peace will be achieved. Trying to negotiate might seem impossible, but without attempting to do so will only result in failure. Looking at the past failures can help the United Nations in deciding how to address a future peace agreement.
In finding a peace agreement, the United Nations needs to receive money to help support the International Red Cross and Red Crescent, who have been aiding the Afghanis throughout providing humanitarian aid. According to the article on the ICRC webpage, the violence and fighting is rapidly spreading through Afghanistan, which is causing casualties that are increasing daily. The United Nations must bring troops into Afghanistan and fund them so the Red Cross is able to extend their care by creating new offices throughout Afghanistan. To send in troops, the United Nations would also have to create a peacekeeping mission. With all of the recent problems, failure of the United Nations to consider Afghanistan a top priority is dangerous, and it is doubtful that there would be a mission.
With the violent acts of the Taliban that are still going on in Afghanistan, a future agreement is definitely needed. The United Nations is supposed to set a universal example, and Afghanistan is a great opportunity to do this. Through admitting there are issues, other countries around the world will contribute to fix the problem of not having enough money. Giving money will be helping groups such as the International Red Cross to provide humanitarian aid to those in need of it. After providing the appropriate aid, a peace agreement can be created and enforced. If the UN makes this agreement, they do not have to follow the ideals of the United States. By learning from past agreements and knowing what they have to do to achieve peace, they will be able to make a peace deal that will be enforced and ultimately save the people of Afghanistan.